Have you ever felt like the whole world is against you? Like no matter what you do, you just can't get ahead. You keep getting slapped down, put in your place, or put in a place you don't think you deserve? Well, if you do, if you have experienced that, then you kind of know what it's like to be Peter Parker, Spider Man. And I think you get the appeal of Spider Man. And I have to say that this latest issue that I've read and review, or that I'm going to review now, is I've already used the phrase quintessential Spider-Man in reviewing something, but I feel like this definitely qualifies for that. This is MJ, and I love Spider-Man, and right now I would like to talk about Amazing Spider-Man, issue number 5. Correction, this is issue number 4, and it is the debut of Sandman, which was very interesting to me. So, starting off with the cover, and of course, this is art by Ditko, writing by Stan Lee, and I don't remember who did the lettering. But starting off with the cover, it's an interesting cover. I think it's kind of weird because it's showing 4 panels. They are representative of what's in the story, and it's really basically just some dialogue between Sandman and Spider-Man fighting. And like I said, it's representative of what was going to be happening in their actual fights throughout the issue. But it's I don't know, it's just kind of introducing you to the threat of Sandman, which I guess is important, especially because he's not an established character. But it did seem kind of funny. And then the splash page again is basically the same thing. So it's totally out of it's anachronistic. It's not flowing. Actually, hold on, it's even worse than that. Looking at it more closely, it's showing stuff from like the beginning of the issue and the end of the issue, and it's split in the middle between the different scenarios that are found in the story. And Flint Marco's body is centered in the page, and he's spread out, and it's showing the 2 different things. So it certainly looks good. And it grabs your attention, but it's just kind of funny to me that it would be not that it would be like illogical, that it's just about drawing you in, which I guess I don't know, man. I guess that's how they had to do it back in the day. Although I hear some comics reviewers complain about the modern splash pages because they're like synopses. They're heavy on text and they contain a bunch of information, but it's not really something to draw you in visually. So I guess I can see both sides of the argument, that maybe there are 2 extremes there. Before I get away from the splash page, though, I do want to point out that like under Spider-Man's leg, there's like books that seem to be falling, and they've been caught mid-action. There's even paper falling like by his knees, and then something weird behind Marco's leg that's turning to sand. There's like a spherical thing. I don't know what that's supposed to be. Maybe that's supposed to be representative of the nuclear blast thing that ended up turning him into Sandman. But just kind of a as much as I find the splash page kind of distracting, as I looked at it more closely here, it is actually pretty cool, all the little details that Ditko put into it. So hats off to you, sir. Before I go any further, I do want to go ahead and just say that this is an excellent issue. Like I said, it's quintessential Spider-Man, and I just think it was so well executed. It's probably the best of the. There's been Amazing Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3, and this is 4. It's the best so far of those, and it's even better than Amazing Fantasy 15. So there's the review. It's great. Part of what makes it great is the growth and the expansion of the action and what Spider-Man can do. We have this great shot of him web slinging through the cities, going into the Daily Bugle to actually like prank J. Jonah Jameson, but that doesn't matter because it looks really great. We get the just to see him swinging around, and we get to see the font for the Daily Bugle and stuff like that. And then it's really weird. Sandman is like a freak. He's actually very interesting to me because he's like Mr. Fantastic as far as how he's able to manipulate his body. But if Mr. Fantastic was obviously a bad guy, and then if his body could break up and kind of compartmentalize And I think that's pretty, like, a really interesting power set. So we get these great images of him, running from the police. They're trying to tackle him, and he turns his legs to sand so he can avoid them. And then he, like, becomes a sand serpent, basically. And he's able to do that because the sand is so light, it can kind of float on air. I guess the grain sand that he is very fine, and he can separate it out and just barely keep the sand like wisping together so that he can propel his body and move it in all sorts of weird ways. And it looks freaky, but it's very visually interesting. And I think it's such a great, unique set of abilities, or he's able to accomplish so much with that one ability. He can make his body loose and soft. He can also make it very hard and dense, or dense in certain areas. And it's just really exciting how much of a threat he can be to Spider-Man, how much of a threat he can be to the police. But I do find it interesting, and I really appreciated that at one point he's like having inner monologue, I think, or maybe he's talking out loud, I don't know. And he's like, oh, I gotta, find a place to hole up and rest because, I'm getting tired from, turning myself into sand all the time. And I really love that tension, that as powerful as he is, as amazing as his abilities are, he's still partly human, and he can become fatigued, and he needs to rest in order to continue to do things. I mean, just like Peter, there's limits to what these guys can do, and that's a lot of fun. And really it raises the stakes and makes things more interesting. One thing I kind of have to give a little... I don't know who does, so I don't know if the letterers do the word balloons and the thought balloons or not, but there's this one panel where Spider-Man is fighting Sandman in the school, and Flash is there, Liz is there, and then I don't know the other students, but they're featured, and they're like right behind Spider-Man, and he's thinking something. He's saying like, oh, I wonder if they'd be cheering if they knew, puny Parker was, actually Spider-Man and fighting this guy. And it really looked to me, especially because of how excited Flash is and he's smiling and the way that the bubbles go, that it was Flash who was having that thought. And I was thinking, wait a minute, does Flash know? He can't know because that's, he doesn't know. That's, part of the shtick between the two of them, and what makes, the dynamics between Flash and Spider-Man and Peter so interesting. And so, I mean, I'll throw a little shade at whoever did that. I don't know. Again, I don't know if Ditko throws the word bubbles in there, or those bubbles in there, or if it's somebody else. And like, if it's somebody else, does that mean he does all the art and then they choose to, back in the day, they had to choose to cover up the artwork with the balloons? Because that, I wonder how they would even accomplish that. Would they like paint white out over it to make that happen? And then would they edge it in black? Or I'm really fascinated in the process of how comics were actually manufactured. I'd like to look into that at some point. Comic Tropes had a really cool video where he talked about lettering, and he showed lettering tools. They're like stencils, and that was pretty neat. Anyway, I'll continue to be critical for a little bit. There's this thing towards the end of the comic where Peter's pulling the camera off of his belt, which I love that it's built in there and that he has that and stuff. But the way Ditko drew his legs, I don't know if he's doing some bad foreshortening or what, but like one of his thighs is, well, they're both malformed basically, but I kind of think he was just trying to squeeze them into the panel, and I think it would have been better if he had let Peter's left thigh go out of frame or touch the panel or go into the gutter or whatever, just because it looks so scrawny and so thin, it just doesn't match, and it looks really bad. And again, I don't know how rushed this was, but then he's like got all this detail on his hands with the webbing, and even going up on his torso with the webbing, and it's just funny that you have these great details in this up close shot, and then his legs really nasty, and then you've got amazing shots like the one where he jumps in, surprises Marco, and decks him, because previously when they had fought, because Marco knew that they were fighting, he just made his body hard, and then Sandman ends up going into Peter's school, which is, of course, and Peter hears it all, and then he's able to, he's wearing a suit under his clothes, so he changes real quick, and then he jumps into the room, and of course he's got, super strength and speed, so he's able to surprise Marco and punch him. And it's really cool the way that Ditko did the speed lines. It looks like he leapt into the room, crouched, and then flung himself as hard as he could at Marco. And he just really decks him. It was pretty cool. I like to imagine, based on that and having read all the little details about their previous fight, that maybe Marco realized what was going on and he hardened himself as much as he could in the seconds before Spider-Man hit him, because it should have knocked his head off if well, I don't know how strong they thought Spider-Man was at this time, but in Amazing Fantasy 15 he easily crushes a pipe with his hand, and he tears the door off of the Chameleon's helicopter and stuff like that, so he's obviously very strong. So I'm gonna say that Marco, or Sandman, was hardening himself so that he could not get hurt, but just Spider-Man hit him so damn hard that it knocked him out. And gosh, that was a great it's a great little scene there, and it just, like I said, the art is fantastic. So there's a couple tangents story-wise that I want to discuss real quick, and one of them is that the principal, I can't remember his name now, I took note of it earlier, but it's been a long day. Anyway, the principal stands up. Marco's in the high school, and he's demanding that he get a diploma, and he's like, hey, principal, you better give me a diploma, because I'm, Sandman, and I'm all powerful, and I can get whatever I want. I've been robbing banks, I've been doing all this stuff, and I never finished high school, but now I want my diploma, give me one. And the principal's like, no, I'm not going to give you one. I'm an educator, I take these things seriously, and I will not do that. And then things escalate, and basically the principal is like, hey, these students, their safety and their education are both my responsibility as the head of this school, as the principal, and I will not allow you to harm them. And he stands up to this guy. He stands up to this known supervillain. And Sandman already has this reputation as this nigh unstoppable burglar. Are you a burglar? If you don't burglars sneak in, he'd be a robber. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But people know how tough this guy is, and the police have gone after him. And anyway, so it was really cool that the principal was that brave. And even the kids are like, man, this principal rocks. They're like, oh, what a swell guy. I can't remember what they said specifically, but some of them are like, man, this guy's really cool. And I was really impressed by that too. That's interesting. That shows a lot of character, obviously. And it's fictional, but I just thought, man, this principal is so much better than the losers we got in Far From Home or Homecoming even. This is kind of interesting, and it's a different tone. It was a different time, but I appreciated seeing such a noble, courageous, outstanding, stand-up kind of guy, a heroic, civilian citizen in the issue, and that's pretty cool. And I think actually the two of them talking and having words, and the principal trying to defend the students, and but also standing on principle, not just saying yeah, I'm here, I'll sign a diploma for you, get out of here, leave us alone, which I think there's some merit to that concept too. But I think their confrontation ended up giving Peter the opportunity to change into his costume and then deck deck Sandman. Another thing is, I thought this was really weird that somehow the news media, or the news, knew all about Flint Marko and how he became Sandman, that he was at this nuclear site, and that an explosion went off, and then he got blasted by it, but he was on the beach, and somehow he got melted with the sand. And I appreciated seeing all that stuff, but it was really weird. I guess the framing device that Ditko and Lee picked was, Peter's home, and he has to pretend he's sick for Aunt May's sake. He's gonna have the opportunity to hear this stuff, or get Sandman's backstory. And it was just weird. I don't know. I didn't like it in the moment, but I just kind of went along with it, and it was fine. It was interesting how they framed it. I really like in Spider-Man 3 how sympathetic of a character he gets to be, but you can't have everything. And I'll be interested to see if some of those things get added to his character later on in further appearances. But he's like a roughneck. Or he's a tough guy. He's mean. He's a jerk. Very villainous, very selfish in this appearance. And like I said, it'll be interesting to see if he has any nuance going forward. But I can definitely see why he is such a formidable character. I'm pretty sure he's part of the Sinister Six at some point. And it makes sense because, thinking about his abilities and how flexible he is and all the things he's able to do, definitely give Spider-Man a run for his money. Anyway, so back to this being quintessential Spider-Man. The things that were really interesting to me were like how, the fight was very creative, and it kept evolving and changing. And like the two of them, Sandman and Spider-Man, were using all these different tactics against each other. And then finally, Spider-Man actually used trickery and his cleverness, his clever mind, to defeat Marco. Which was really cool to see. And then he does this fake news thing where he basically, after he's defeated him, he sets up a shot for himself to be faking. Anyway, he ends up faking footage of Spider-Man fighting Sandman by throwing sand up in the air and then pretending to fight it and stuff, which is weird. And I can't remember now if Jameson paid for it or not. I kind of don't think he did, which kind of makes me happy because that's more financial problems for him. And I don't know, interesting stuff. Like he was wanting to make money and he went in for an advance so that he could experiment with his webbing, because he wanted to try to see if he could modify his webbing to help him use that to beat Sandman, but it didn't work out. But then there was other little things that were really interesting that go to the it being such a Spider-Man story. Spider-Man makes life difficult for Peter Parker. He has an opportunity to go on a date with Liz Allen, and he ruins that. And then he thinks he fixed it, and then it turns out he didn't, and she's still mad at him and stuff. And like at the end of the issue, he's questioning why he's going to continue being Spider-Man, but he decides he has to because he can do so much good. And it was just it was beautiful. It was kind of touching. But definitely, the thing I loved about it the most actually was Lee's words paired so well with Ditko's art. And again, it felt the art in the last panel I'm thinking about, where he's questioning things, but then finds the resolve to keep with it and to keep acting as a hero. It feels representative. It's very much not realistic. It's very expressive. It's almost the core thing, Peter standing there in his room is the only thing I can take 100% literally, and then everything else is just an expression or an interpretation of how he's feeling, and the way it's framed is just symbolic of the struggle that he's going through, what his identity is, and whether or not he should keep doing what he's doing. And gosh, that was really cool. But one last thing, and I should have said this before, but I'll kind of close with this. At some point, his mask gets torn, and he has this whole little fantasy, a half page or maybe even a full page, fantasizing what would happen if he was found out, and because his mask is torn, and that was interesting. But then he ends up going home and sewing it, and some hijinks happens with Ant-Man. It's pretty funny actually. But then as soon as she's away, we get to see him sewing the mask back up, and he keeps poking himself, and he's like, "Oh, I'm such a crummy sewer. I'm no seamstress, whatever." And just all those little touches that really humanize him. If I had to sew a mask up, I would be screwed, especially if my life depended on it, so to speak. I would get it done. I'd probably poke myself. Just all those troubles that he has are really just they make you feel for the guy. They make you commiserate with him, and I think that's I don't know, a great thing about Spider-Man for me. Anyway, this is going on too long. I'm going to go ahead and stop. Thanks for sticking with me. Check out mgwinners.com for more of my work. I'm an aspiring author who will gladly accept your financial support through coffee, or you can buy merch from my Redbubble store. Swinging Through Comics can be found on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and mgmunoz.com/STC. Relevant links are in the show notes. If you had a good time, like and share this. Subscribe and ring that bell to catch me next time I'm Swinging Through Comics.